Well, welcome to part 3 of this Kreg Precision Router Table build out and kind of in-depth review. Today it's going to be all about this plate. This is the plate that the router mounts to and drops in and pretty much turns this from a table into a shop tool. And to be honest with you, this is the part that's got me a little nervous. We have to go ahead and we got to follow templates and drill holes and countersink holes for screws and take the router apart. But we're going to jump right into that. So this is part 3. If you haven't seen part 1 and 2, there is a link right here. You can go ahead and click on that playlist and check out the other parts. And I'm just going to go ahead and go grab the router. Okay, back with the router. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can mount the router to this plate. Now, certain routers like this DeWalt actually have screw patterns on the bottom that are marked out in the instruction manual. So supposedly this DeWalt router uses pattern 1, but we're going to go through the generic process of how to mount any router. So now the first thing you want to do is make sure the plate is facing forward. So this is actually the front of the router table and the logo is facing forward. So this is the way you would be facing the table. You are the person working on it right now. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this plate and we're going to flip it over. Now with the plate flipped over, you can kind of get an idea of how the router is gonna fit. Now obviously it can go almost any direction, but the way you're gonna wanna at least initially position the plate is so that you can access all the controls and that the wire and everything makes sense to you. So for this DeWalt router, if I put it this way, we have easy access from the front to the on-off switch. We have easy access to the unlock of the base, and this will allow us to change the height of the router bit. And the cord is right here in the back, so this makes sense as far as being able to route out through the back of the router. So when this is done, we will just flip this all over and drop it in, and everything kind of maintains its positioning. One of the things we want to be really careful of is that once this router is mounted, that it doesn't impede the functionality. So for this router, there's nothing really to worry about except where this little starter peg goes into place from the other side. Now, the next step for mounting this is we're going to need to remove this bottom plate right here. The actual screws in the router that hold this in place are the ones that we're going to reuse to mount it to the router table base. So let's go ahead and take this plate off, but we also want to make sure that we don't accidentally turn it and forget which way it goes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little piece of tape just to mark both edges. Just use my fingernail to cut the tape a little bit right here. And now once I take the base off, I'll know which way it goes back on the router. From here, we'll just go ahead and remove this base plate. So now we can use this base plate to align the holes for the router, and we can also make sure and double check that this is all positioned the way we want it. So again, if I want the router facing this way, I can see that the base plate faces towards the back like this. This DeWalt router has a second screw pattern on the router base over here, and that's where the 3 screws that go in and match the template that Kreg has already pre-printed on this. However, if you were using a router that didn't have one of the pre-printed patterns, and most routers seem to have a pattern that fits these plates, and I'll show that right here with a close-up of the instruction manual of what routers are supported. You can just go ahead, figure out which pattern it is, and that's the pattern you're going to drill. Now, if your router does not have one of those patterns, you're going to need to take this base plate and center it up using these guide indicators, and you're going to want to rotate it and make sure it matches up with your router so that you can drill those screw patterns into place. Now, one of the things you're going to want to make sure is that the screw goes through too close to where I showed you where that starter pin goes. In that case, you'll wind up hitting the starter pin metal where it threads through, or maybe cracking the plate because you're drilling a hole too close to it. So you want to make sure you give it a little headroom when you're drilling that hole. So what you can do is, and I'll use this plate as an example, is once you line it up, you can set it the way you want. Then once you think it's close, you can take the router, again using the tape to line it up, set it back down on top of that plate, and make sure you have all the functions like the on-off switch, the wire routing, the lock for the rise and the fall of the router. And once it's set in place, you can go ahead and remove this, and then just take the plate and tape it down. Now when you drill the holes, you can just use these actual plate holes as guides for your drill and drill them straight through the plate. Now since ours doesn't need this plate, we can remove it. But the drilling of the holes is exactly the same process. Alrighty, let's talk about some drilling options, starting from the trickiest to the best way and easiest way of doing it. Now the first way is just to use the sub base from your router, which is taped down to the plate, and use the holes as guides to drill through the base plate. Now I just have this base plate sitting on top of a used piece of MDF, just so when the drill bit passes through, it won't drill into anything else I don't want it to. Also will keep some splintering from the back side of the plate to a minimum. And the way we can go about drilling this is put the size bit that matches the screws for our router, and go ahead and just use these as guides and drill straight through. Now, to do this, it's probably a good idea to take a little scrap piece of wood and draw a straight line on the back of it, and then use that line as a guide to keep your drill straight while you're drilling through. Now, while this will work, it is kind of prone to mistakes, and you could very easily slip, move, and wind up not drilling a straight hole. The second thing you'll notice too is that you'll need a longer drill bit to make sure that you can use the guide and still drill through the whole base plate. Now, the second way to do this is to use one of these drill blocks, and this is actually a really good solution for people who don't have a drill press. The way this works is you would just take the hole that fits your bit and use it as a guide, and this will hold the drill straight as it goes through, and then line that hole right up over the top of the one in the base plate, and you can put the drill in and make sure it locks into place and goes through both holes, and then use this as a guide to drill straight through, and this will create a perfectly straight hole right through the base plate and work pretty much almost as good as a drill press. Now, once you have everything lined up, I do recommend that you clamp this down in some way to hold it in place, because the last thing you really want to do is move it while you're drilling. That can cause some shifting and cause it not to go through true. But the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to use a drill press. It is the best way to do it, and it will guarantee without any error that the drill bit goes straight through this plate. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up. I got the drill press set up and I'm ready to start drilling. The first thing I did is I put a little painter's tape down on the base just to keep the plate from scratching when I do the actual drilling. And before I actually start, I want to use a little piece of scrap wood to kind of create a template of sorts. And that's because bits and screws are a little bit different, and I want to make sure that the screw fits the way it should and the countersink is the right depth before I go and drill the final plate. Now, one thing I did is I switched up the screws I'm going to use. I know earlier on I said we can just reuse the screws that were used to hold the plate in place, but after I looked at them, they were not flat top screws, and they would have required a little bit more to countersink properly, and they would have had a bigger hole around it. So I went and just bought 832 machine screws that match the same threading as the ones that came with it, and I'm going to go ahead and use those. Now I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to drill this template board, and then we'll test out to make sure the screws fit properly. Now that this board is drilled, we'll just take a look and see how this screw fits. Fits perfect, so I think we can go ahead and use this combination to drill the board. Drilling the hole for the screw is pretty simple because the drill bit just passes right through the board. The countersink, we got to be a little bit more careful, and when we do the countersink, we want to make sure it doesn't go too deep into the board, and we also want to make sure that it isn't too shy of the board where it would get hooked on some kind of material that was sliding across to the routing bit. Now to do that, I went and I used our template board, and I drilled a little bit at a time until the screw fit perfectly flush with the board, and then I just put a little piece of tape around my countersink bit. So now when I insert it and I push down, I can see when the tape hits the plate, and I will mark it there. And then I'll just repeat this process for all 3 holes. And there we go. Board is drilled perfectly. All 3 countersinks look good. Now we are ready to clean this up a bit and go ahead and mount it to the router. So before I do that, I'm just going to move this drill press out of the way and we'll get to it. To finish this up, we just take the base plate, line it up with the screw pattern on the bottom of the router, and go ahead and put the screws in. All right, now we can drop the whole plate into the insert. And now we can use the Allen key and the little leveling screws from the bottom to make sure that the plate is flush with the table. And with all the levels adjusted, we just need to screw the plate into the table. And this is just the screws that came with the kit. With the router plate installed, there's really only a couple more things to do to finish this part of the installation up, and that is to put the starter pin together. And this has this little tiny screw, and you just use the Allen key and put it in like this. And then just use a screwdriver to tighten it up. Now the starter pin screws into this little brass thread right here, but you won't always be using this. This is for freehand routing where you need some place to push the material up before engaging with the router bit. So for the most part, it's going to be put away, and that's why the shelf under this is real nice to store pieces like that. But for now, we'll just leave this in place. The final pieces are these throat plates, and they are labeled for what they are and what size they are. So based on what kind of router bit you're using and the size of it, you might need different ones. So the Kreg kit comes with 3 of them, and I'm just going to go ahead and pop one in to show you how it works. This is a pretty small one, the smallest one that comes in the kit, and it basically just fits around the bushing that holds my router bit. And then it also comes with this gray Kreg key that just snaps into place, and you twist it to lock it, and now it can't be removed. And you can twist it the other way and it will unlock, and now you can just pull it out. So nice and simple. Well, that wraps up the install of the router into the router plate and the plate into the tabletop. So we're going to finish up this video right here, and next time on part 4 of this series on the Kreg Precision Router Table, we'll go ahead and we will install the fence. So we're getting pretty close to finishing up this series. Anyway, until next time, good luck with all your DIY projects, and if you like this video and want to see more, or want to know when the next part comes out, be sure to subscribe and like this video below. And of course, if you have any comments or questions, leave those below as well. I get to them as fast as possible, usually in less than 24 hours, and I am happy to help anyone who has probably all the same problems I've encountered already. All right then, that's pretty much it. See you next time.